The ground shook beneath my boots the moment the rain started. Just a low rumble at first, like distant thunder buried under the earth. I knew instantly what it meant. The stadium Karen forced onto my swampland was finally giving way. And as the first section of bleachers sank into the mud, I realized something else. This wasn't just a disaster. It was the exact moment I had warned her about. But to understand how we got here, how an HOA president with a god complex managed to seize my land, build a stadium on a swamp, and turn an entire community into a collapse zone, you have to go back to the beginning. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind where the world feels too calm before something goes wrong. I was clearing brush near the edge of my property when 3 SUVs rolled up the dirt road in perfect formation. That was my first warning. Karen never traveled alone. She treated her HOA board like a personal security team. Clipboards, instead of weapons, but the same energy. She stepped out first, wearing her blazer-like armor and her sunglasses like she was inspecting a crime scene. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice dripping with the kind of false politeness that always precedes trouble. "We have a community project to discuss." I leaned on my shovel. If it's about sidewalk paint colors again, the answer is still no. Her smile tightened. "No, this concerns land. Your land." Before I could answer, she snapped her fingers, and one of her board members unfurled a blueprint the size of a tarp. Bold letters ran across the top. "Community Sports and Events, Mega Stadium." I almost laughed. "On a swamp? You can't be serious." She was. Karen explained that the HOA required the land for a regional development initiative, and that they had already voted to reassign the parcel for construction. Translation, they wanted my swampland, and they didn't care that it was structurally worthless, environmentally sensitive, and legally mine. I told her no. She told me it wasn't the request. And then the letters started coming. Threats, fines, citations for violations that didn't exist. When that didn't work, she escalated, invoking some obscure HOA clause no one had ever heard of. A month later, I stood on the porch holding a notice of land reassignment. They had taken it. The swampland was no longer mine. And within weeks, construction crews rolled in, pounding pylons into mud that swallowed them like quicksand. I warned them. I warned her. But Karen believed rules and nature bowed to her. Turns out nature doesn't negotiate. By the time summer heat settled in, the construction site looked less like a stadium project and more like a battlefield. Tall cranes leaned at odd angles, trucks sank up to their axles in soft ground, and half-finished concrete pillars wobbled like drunk fence posts. Every time I passed, I couldn't help thinking one thing. They were building a monument to Karen's ego, and gravity was already rejecting it. But none of that mattered to her. To Karen, appearances were more important than physics. She paraded around the site daily in her branded HOA vest, barking orders into a walkie-talkie like she was directing an action movie. The workers hated her. I could tell. Every time she turned her back, they exchanged that exhausted look people share when they've been told to do something impossible. I kept my distance. Legally, the swamp wasn't mine anymore, but emotionally, I still felt every crack, every misplaced beam, every sinking pylon like a personal insult. It wasn't just bad planning. It was sabotage of common sense. And then came the environmental inspector. He arrived in a white truck with government plates. Clipboard in hand, frown already loaded. I watched from the public road as he surveyed the site, stepping carefully around puddles that were more like bottomless pits. When he spoke to Karen, I could almost read his lips. "This ground is unstable." Karen crossed her arms, lifting her chin like she was arguing with a waiter about soup temperature. "We ran tests," she insisted. "The soil passed." I knew for a fact she hadn't run anything except a meeting where she bullied the board into pretending they had. The inspector wasn't buying it. He pointed toward the mud, tapped his notes, and shook his head several times. Karen's smile tightened with every sentence he spoke. Then, in true HOA dictator fashion, she dismissed him with a wave. "This project will proceed," she declared loudly, making sure every worker heard. "We are on schedule." On schedule for what, collapse? The next week, the inspector returned with a supervisor. This time, they drew samples, took photographs, and roped off 2 sections of the site with warning tape. The workers cheered under their breath. Karen was furious. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know you warned them. I can't put anything in writing, but this project isn't safe. Not even close. No name, no signature. But I knew it was the inspector. Someone else finally understood. But Karen didn't want understanding. She wanted a stadium, and she was willing to threaten, bribe, and bulldoze her way through anything to get it. The first real warning came not from an inspector, not from a worker, and certainly not from Karen, but from the sky. Late one evening, clouds gathered over the swamp with that heavy, metallic stillness that means trouble. I stood on my porch, watching the horizon bruise into deep purple. Weather like this was normal for my land, but not for Karen's. Construction fantasy. Swamps breathe water. They stretch, sink, swell, and shift. Anyone who lives near one understands that. Anyone except Karen. Sure enough, as the first sheet of rain swept across the field, construction lights flickered like dying fireflies. The mud, already disturbed from weeks of drilling and digging, turned instantly to sludge. And the half-built stadium, skeleton towering, steel arcs perched on wishful thinking, groaned under the shifting ground. I grabbed my jacket and headed down the road. I wasn't trying to help them. I wanted to witness the moment reality tapped Karen on the shoulder. By the time I arrived, water rushed across the site like a shallow river. Workers scrambled, trying to stabilize equipment. A forklift slid sideways, sinking until only the operator's terrified face remained above the mudline. They pulled him out with a rope. And then she arrived. Karen marched through the chaos holding a giant HOA umbrella, shouting as though volume itself could stop a flood. Everyone stay calm. The foundation is secure, the engineers assured me. A loud crack cut her off. One of the stadium's support pylons shifted several inches, tilting like a collapsing tooth. Workers yelled, backing away. Karen stared, frozen. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, she looked scared. I stepped forward. This is what I warned you about. Swamps don't care about your deadlines. She spun around, eyes blazing. This rain is temporary. The ground will settle. I laughed. I couldn't help it. No, Karen, the ground is sinking. There's a difference. Her face tightened. You're enjoying this. I'm witnessing it, I corrected. There's a difference there too. Suddenly headlights swept across the site. The environmental inspector's truck sloshed through the mud, water climbing halfway up his tires. He jumped out, shouting over the storm. Shut it down. This isn't safe. None of this is safe. You don't have authority here? Karen barked. He pointed toward the listing steel frame. Nature has the authority now. Another groan rippled through the structure. The workers didn't wait. Half the site evacuated instantly. Even Karen stepped back, though she tried to hide it. The rain kept falling. The swamp kept shifting. And the stadium kept sinking. This wasn't the collapse. Not yet. But it was the promise of what was coming. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. By the time the storm finally eased, the stadium project looked less like a construction site and more like a wreck swallowed by the earth. The entire field had dipped, the center sinking several feet into a muddy bowl. Steel beams twisted at strange angles, some submerged, others pointing skyward like broken ribs. But Karen? She marched onto the site the moment the clouds cleared, HOA clipboard in hand, acting as though 2 days of disaster were merely an inconvenience. Everyone back to work, she shouted to the exhausted crew. We can still meet the deadline. The workers didn't move. They stared at her like she was asking them to finish a marathon on one leg. The inspector tried again, waving his reports like warning flags. This ground is compromised. The pilings have shifted. The foundation isn't just unstable, it's disappearing. Karen rolled her eyes. You've been against this project since day one. Your numbers are exaggerated. It's not a debate, he snapped. It's physics. She ignored him and walked straight toward the sunken center of the field. Mud sucked at her boots with every step, but she pushed forward, determined to reclaim control of a situation she had never understood. Then she stopped, pointing at a rising column of water bubbling through the ground. What is that? She demanded. I answered from behind her. An underground spring. You uncovered it when you drove the pylons in. Her face froze. Springs weren't on the site report. I shrugged. Because you didn't order a real geological survey. She opened her mouth, but then the ground beneath her shifted. A wet, sucking sound rippled across the mud. The workers shouted. The inspector lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm as her foot sank nearly to her knee. He yanked her back just in time. A moment later, the spring erupted, shooting a geyser of muddy water several feet into the air. The entire center of the stadium collapsed another foot in seconds, swallowing rebar, wooden framing, and a cement mixer that slid into the hole like a toy. Alarmed voices rose around us. Some of the workers backed away. Some filmed. Karen stood trembling, covered in mud, staring at the geyser as though the swamp had personally insulted her. This can't happen, she whispered. It already is, I said. This land was never meant for this kind of weight. She shook her head violently. We'll fix it. We'll reinforce everything. This project will not fail. The inspector looked at her with a mix of pity and disbelief. Karen still didn't understand. The stadium wasn't failing. It was being reclaimed. The last storm didn't arrive like the others. It didn't roll in quietly or build slowly across the horizon. It came roaring over the tree line with the force of a freight train, wind, snapping branches, rain slashing sideways, thunder exploding overhead like artillery. Even before the first drop hit the ground, I knew. This was the storm that would finish what Karen started. I grabbed my coat and headed toward the construction site. Not because I wanted to help, no. I wanted to witness the moment truth arrived with no sugarcoating, no HOA memos, no community initiatives, just nature doing what nature does. By the time I reached the road, floodwater streamed across it like a shallow river. The stadium skeleton loomed in the distance, half submerged, swaying with every gust of wind. Construction lights flickered wildly until one by one they shorted out, popping in bursts of sparks. And in the middle of the chaos, there she was. Karen stood on a temporary platform near the entrance, clutching her clipboard as though paperwork could hold back a natural disaster. Even from a distance, I could see her shaking, not from fear of the storm, but from fear of losing control. The inspector and several workers rushed toward her, yelling for her to evacuate. She refused. "This project will survive," she screamed over the wind. "It's just water." But it wasn't just water. The ground beneath the stadium rippled, literally rippled, like something alive was moving underneath. The swamp had reached its limit. Weeks of drilling, digging, and forcing steel into soft ground had weakened everything. The land wasn't a foundation. It was a trap waiting for the final trigger. Lightning split the sky. A deafening crack echoed through the air. The last central support beam, already leaning from the previous storms, snapped. Not slowly, not gradually. In one violent motion, it tore loose, pulling the entire stadium frame sideways. The workers scattered. The inspector dove behind a concrete barrier. Karen screamed as the platform beneath her tilted, sending her sliding down a slope of slick mud. The inspector sprinted through knee-deep water to grab her, hauling her out of the path of falling steel. And then it happened. The stadium collapsed inward, the entire structure folding and sinking as if swallowed whole. Steel groaned, mud surged upward, and a plume of water burst into the air as the foundation gave way entirely. When the noise settled, nothing remained but a twisted, half-buried ruin. Karen sat trembling on the ground, staring at the collapse with wide, hollow eyes. Her clipboard floated past her like a reminder of every arrogant decision she had made. "It's over," I said quietly. She didn't argue. For the first time, she finally understood what the swamp had been trying to say all along. Nature always wins.